Here we go. I want to apologize in the recording for not recording the last one. So for posterity, in case somebody in 10 years from now is watching these videos on YouTube and they want to know what happened to the last lecture, now they know what happened. I forgot to record it. We are up to Perek Chav Ches in the first chelek of Mor Nevuchim. That's chapter 28 in the Pines translation that lands in volume 1, page 59. And he's going to translate the word regel, which literally translates to mean foot. And the as Rambam usually is wont to do, he will show us how the word that originally started meaning foot ends up meaning a lot of other much more sublime ideas, and which will catapult us into a totally different subject, which I'll address soon, and should make this an interesting lecture. So let's begin with chapter 28. Regel, the word foot, is equivocal, right? Equivocal means it means several different things. It is a term whose basic meaning denotes a foot. In my usual manner, I'm going to follow the Pines, but forgive me if I don't use his exact English or if I skip sentences, but you can more or less follow along with me as I go through it. Thus, it says in the Torah, regel tachas regel, which is referring to punishing someone who hurt someone else's foot, that that other person is punished with an equivalent punishment. And there it's obviously referring to an actual foot. But it also sometimes means following, and like the one person follows another, such as the verse where it says, say atah v'chol ha'am asher biraglecha, right? You should go, and all of the nation that is following you. Literally, it literally translates to all the nation that is at your feet, meaning they are following you. And once it means that, and Rambam is tracing the meaning of the word from foot to following, and that's logical. We can understand why following, because generally people follow with their feet, right? It also means it's someone being the cause of something else. So his example there is and God blessed you, right? This is Yaakov speaking to Lavan. He says, God blessed you liragli, because of me. In other words, it followed after me. I was the one who brought this event to you, or brought this thing, this happening, or this good to you. I made you wealthy. It was what it was referring to specifically there. I am the cause, right? For when a thing exists for the sake of some other thing, something happens because of something else, the latter is the cause of the former. And this meaning is frequently used. So for example, l'regel hamilacha asher lefanai, right? So this is talking, l'regel ha'iladim. This is where Jacob is talking to Esav. Yaakov is talking to Esav, his brother, and Esav tells him to come, and Yaakov says, I need to go slower because of the cattle that go before me, and because of the children. Similarly, so now here it starts to get a little bit more sublime, which is the reason why the Rambam is emphasizing what seems to, in the beginning, be a mundane term referring to a foot, is used in two verses which are worth considering. The first one is where it is from Zechariah, from the prophecy of the prophet Zechariah, where he's talking about the future redemption, and it says, "V'amdu raglav." I'm sorry, I just had to mute everybody. I apologize. It says, "V'amdu raglav bayom mahu al har hazeitzim," right? And it's referring to God Himself there, and it says, "And He will stand." His feet will stand on that day, meaning that ultimate day of redemption in the future, on the Mount of Olives. Now, that's a very difficult verse to translate, especially according to Rambam's insistence that God has no corporeal. He can't be described as having feet. So what does it mean? God will be standing with His feet on the Mount of Olives. He's going to mention in a moment. I'm just want to tell you now another verse where it says, where it talks about Moshe and Aaron and the elders. They saw God, and it says over there that v'tachas raglav kimase livnata sapphire, that beneath his feet was like the whiteness of a sapphire stone. We're going to get to that in a minute, but those are the two verses that Rambam is seriously bothered by, which is the reason why he's talking about the meaning of the word foot. So what does this mean? With his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. What does Zechariah mean when he said that? What did he wants us to imagine God as some giant standing on the mountain? Like, what exactly does that mean? So it actually means something very deep and profound. It signifies thereby, and I'm reading in the Pines, the establishment of the things that he has caused. Meaning God, remember the regel, right? Something that comes, the regel of something else, means it was caused by that something else. God standing on the Mount of Olives, Jerusalem, which is the central place of the redemption of this whole process. It's all centered around Jerusalem. Now, if anyone who's been to Jerusalem knows, when you stand in most of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives is an imposing mountain that you see from most vantage points, especially from the Temple Mount. So the vision of God on standing on the Mount of Olives means, according to Rambam, it means it will be so obvious that it is God who brought all of this about, right? Because God standing upon Mount of Olives means God is the cause of all of these events that is occurring. And if you think about it, it's really incredible because it's not, it's not obvious because they are miracles per se, but it's just all of a sudden becomes clear that all of this was from God. And that's what Zechariah means when he says God will be standing on the Mount of Olives. So I mean, and here's in the Rambam's words in Pine's translation, I mean of the wonders that will then become manifest at that place, and of which God, may he be exalted, is the cause. I mean the maker, right? And this is the same interpretation which is written by the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which is last week we spent a lot of time where Rambam was complimenting Targum Onkelos. And Targum Onkelos, Rambam loves Targum Onkelos, and he explained why last time. If you didn't listen last time, I'm sorry. But now he also quotes a lot from Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, which is a different Aramaic translation, but also of a similar time period. But Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, he uses on the Nevi'im, on the prophets and the writings, on Nevi'im and Ketuvim more, and Onkelos more on Chamisha Chomshei Torah, on the 5 books of Moshe. So over there, how does Yonasan ben Uziel translate? And he will manifest himself in his might on that day upon the Mount of Olives. So this is in the actual Aramaic, it's V'yiskali b'gvurtei b'yomahahu al tur zeisaya, and God will be revealed in all of his strength on that day on the Mountain of Olives. And this is a similar way whenever it's referred to, whenever God is referred to as something, an action, a doing, a going, he translates it as God's strength. It's, in other words, his might is being manifest in this way. So that's the translation of that verse. And what about the other verse that I mentioned? And I told you, I gave you a heads up that he was going to mention. When it says that beneath God's feet was like something made out of the whiteness of sapphire stone. The verse conjures up these very mystical images. So what does it mean to the rationalist Rambam? How does he explain this verse? So again, now he turns to Targum Onkelos, which similar to what he did last week. He says that when it says Raglav is referring to his throne. That's the Onkelos's words. And underneath the throne of his glory. Again, Onkelos is exchanging the word God for the God's glory. So while the verse refers to God himself, Onkelos translates and said it's not referring to God, but it's referring to the glory of God, the manifestation of God, the wonder of God, right? So so the Rambam adds and says, understand this and admire how far Onkelos was from the belief in the corporeality of God. Onkelos again demonstrates his very strong belief that we can't describe God in a corporeal way, because he doesn't say under God's throne, but rather he says under the throne of his glory. So he takes it 2 steps away from a corporeal understanding. The term, if he just said God's throne, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase the next few sentences, then you might imagine there's a God that's sitting on a throne. So again, he's corporeal. You put a throne in the middle, but so therefore he says, V'tachas raglav, he separates it from, meaning the Shechina, the indwelling, or the Shechina, which is how the Onkelos translates Yakrei, right? His glory on a throne, and that's what they saw. So then Rambam continues, and I'm at the second paragraph on page 60 in the Pines. We have gone beyond the subject of the chapter. I've now just went way off in the topic. I started off with the topic of the meaning of the word foot, and now I'm talking about the glory of God's throne. But that's okay, as Rambam says, because I'm going to get back to the topic at hand. As for the interpretation of Onkelos, right, you already know, right? I just explained it to you, and you already know from the last few chapters. You're familiar with how Onkelos translates verses. However, the final end of the matter, the bottom line, consists in the rejection of the doctrine of corporality of God. That I'm trying to tell you, do not think from these verses that God is an actual being, but God has no body. Okay, he does not explain to us exactly what it is that they saw. All he says is the throne of the glory of God was on this work of whiteness of sapphire. The Onkelos doesn't explain that, and Rambam is about to explain that. This very lofty mystical vision, Rambam is about to explain to us what it means. But Onkelos didn't do that. He acts in a similar way everywhere else. He's not concerned with such significations. All he wants to do is to reject the doctrine of corporeality. If you're the public in the time of Onkelos would not have understood their Hebrew very well, which is why Onkelos wrote an Aramaic translation. Onkelos's purpose was to make sure that nobody gets this misunderstanding. That's what Rambam is saying. That's all he needed to do. Translate the verse so no one gets the misunderstanding. But he didn't need to, therefore he made a decision about it and translated accordingly. On the other hand, the explanation of the meaning of the parables, that is a supposititious matter. In other words, you can have a lot of opinions about what it means. I'm going to give you one, and wait for it, because I'm purposely building the suspense here because it's really nice. But I'm going to give you mine, Rambam is about to do, but Onkelos didn't have to do that, because that's a job for you and I as scholars reading through or just wanting to study. But Onkelos's job was to make sure you don't mistranslate it and think that there's some kind of a God standing with feet standing on a stone. That's the main thing, that Onkelos's main purpose. So they are most hidden matters, and it's not a part of the foundations of belief to understand it. You don't need to understand it. If you go about your life doing whatever it is that you do and you never understand the meaning of that verse, it's not the end of the world. You haven't violated one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim, one of the 13 foundations of Judaism. Nor are they easily grasped by the multitude, nor are these concepts easy to understand. Hence, he did not concern himself with their signification. However, for us, those of us, we are on page 60, Jeff. I see your message there. We're on page 60 in volume 1, at the bottom of the page. For us, it is incumbent upon me, in accordance with the purpose of this treatise, since I'm writing this book for smart people, educated people, I have to tell you what in the world this means. What does this mean that God is standing? I just explained to you what it means that he's standing on the Mount of Olives. That was beautiful. That was wonderful. Next time we read Zechariah, we'll remember what Rambam said, that what it means that God's standing with his feet on the mountain, right? However, much to the chagrin of tour guides, as they take you on walking tours of Parazesim and they tell you that God's going to be standing here, they're going to, my mom is saying, no, not exactly. That's not exactly what's going to happen. But anyway, but now I'm going to explain to you this next one. And at this point, we're going to enter into my discussion of Maimonides' view of creation, of the creation of the world. And obviously, that's a huge subject, but that's the subject that this is going to be a nice springboard into that topic, which I'll spend after we read through Rambam's explanation of this verse. I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of how Rambam views creation. We're going to get into it in more and more depth, and we've already touched on it several times, but we'll touch on it again. And there's a lot to learn from this. So I shall accordingly say, I'm just reached to the top of page 61, that when it says under his feet, when the verse of the pasuk says under his feet, God's feet, what it signifies is because, like I've been explaining the whole time, feet means the cause of something, right? And Rambam already explained how that meaning came to be, how the word of regel went from one meaning to another meaning to another meaning, and eventually meant feet. So what they saw, right? And remember, and Pines is a really nice translation here. When they apprehended, meaning they saw, meaning they understood. Because according to Rambam, seeing, as we learned already before in previous chapters, means to comprehend, or to apprehend, to perceive something. What they saw was the reality of first matter. Now, let me give a little bit of an intro here. What is first matter? So first matter is the idea, and it's a Platonic idea. It comes from Plato, who, as far as I know, is the original thinker. And Rambam quotes Plato later to talk about what first matter is. So I didn't get it because I know Plato. I got it because I read Rambam. But anyway, but Plato teaches that God, when he created the world, it can't be that the world came from nothing. Plato couldn't accept, it was a basic philosophy of Plato that the world couldn't have come from nothing, which is where he diverges from basic Judaism, which is that God created the world from nothing. And we'll get a little bit more into that tonight. But however, so what did he do when he created the world? There was some sort of a basic matter from which God created everything. Okay, and that's the first matter. So the first matter is the stuff, is the basic matter, kind of like when they kept trying to break down particles in the Hadron Collider. Eventually, they got to the Higgs boson particle, which a lot of in the press they joke about it and they call it the God particle, right? So I'm not a physicist, so if I'm making mistakes in what I say, then please don't hold me to it. But from what I understand, it's like the smallest particle that they've come up with is the Higgs boson. So basically, the Higgs boson, the bottom line, the stuff that it's all made of, right? That's the first matter. So which derives from him, may he be exalted. Now, Rambam is okay with learning Plato and reading it and talking about first matter as long as he points out to you that the first matter has a cause, which is God. Okay, so that God is the cause of the first matter, which is where he diverges from Plato, which is where Judaism diverges from Plato. Okay, so he being the cause of its existence. So when it says that Moses and Aaron saw that God standing over the livnas sapphire, the whiteness of the sapphire, what it means is they saw God over the first matter. What does it mean they saw him? Not that they saw a being that was God standing on top of a stone, but they apprehended the concept that God was the cause of the first matter. Now, why is it that livnas sapphire, consider its victim, as it were, a work of whiteness of sapphire stone, ma'aseh livnata sapphire. So what does it mean, the whiteness of sapphire stone? Where does that come from? Consider its dictum, as it were, and I'm sorry, if the intended signification had been the color, it would have said the whiteness of sapphire stone. But the word it's not talking about the color, it's talking about a work, livnat sapphire, because matter is always receptive and passive. If one considers its essence, is not active except by accident. Remember that we talked several times about the idea of matter and form, chomer and tzura, right? Chomer, the stuff, doesn't have energy, doesn't have anything animating it. It's its tzura, the energy, the form behind it that makes it move, that makes it go. So the matter itself is nothing unless there's ma'aseh livnata sapphire. The stone is nothing unless there's something making that stone, right? So form, on the other hand, is always active. Tzura is something that makes things go, as has been made clear in the books on natural science. These are ideas that Rambam got directly from Plato and Aristotle, and we've repeated that numerous times. This is why scripture applied to the first matter, the expression. Why did God, the Torah then referred to this first matter as a work, as ma'aseh, for this very reason? And why did it describe it as the whiteness of sapphire stone? Because the whiteness here doesn't mean white, the opaque, the non-see-through white color, right? That we may have our walls painted white, that we can't, and that white color, if you paint your mirror with that white, you won't see anything in that mirror, or won't see anything through that window, right? The whiteness, rather, this is talking about the whiteness of a crystal, right? Which is transparent. It doesn't mean whiteness, it means clarity, it means transparency, right? It's not due to a white color, it's only due to transparency. And as demonstrated in books of natural science, transparency is not a color at all, because if it was a color, you wouldn't be able to see through it. For if it were a color, then if you put something behind it and other colors, you wouldn't see anything behind it. It wouldn't receive all of them, right? So now a transparent body receives all the colors in succession. All colors go through it. I'm not sure if Rambam meant to refer to a prism being separating the colors, but it certainly sounds almost like that. But I don't think they were discovered yet by that time. But the bottom line here is he's saying that all colors go through that transparent window at the same time. And if I'm wrong about my history of science here, please feel free to correct me. I don't claim expertise in these matters. But in this, it resembles the first matter, and that's why it chooses a transparent crystal as representative of this first matter from which everything was created, because which in respect of its true reality lacks all forms. There is no tsura yet. It's just chomer, right? It's just form. That's why everything can go through it. It's transparent. It hasn't yet taken form. It hasn't yet taken shape. Accordingly, their apprehension. So what was it that they saw? Now that I gave you all this background, Rambam says I can get to the bottom line. What they apprehended was the first matter was the object, and how that object was related to God, right? Inasmuch as it is the first among things that he created, because this is the thing that God created first. God created the first matter, and from that he created the whole world. And this was what they perceived, that God is behind everything. And that's what it means, kimaseh livnata sapphire. Personally, I think this is a beautiful way of understanding something which sounded so mystical and so mysterious, some image, and Rambam just turned it into a very scientific sounding concept. In Rambam's day, this was the cutting edge of science, so to speak, and he just explained it. And what he did was to make the Torah different from Plato, to make Moses and Aaron different from Plato, was that they realized was that God was the one who made it all. That's the point here. A disquisition of this notion will come further on. I'm going to talk about this later. I skipped a little, and God is the one that created things that generate and corrupt, meaning they change. And God is the creator ex nihilo, who's the one who created it out of nothing, which again is where thank you for letting us know, Jeff. so it could, if that's the case, if Pliny knew it, then maybe Rambam knew it too. So that's certainly possible. I'd have to see what other scholars say about this verse. If anyone finds more on that, let me know. Know that you require such an interpretation, even according to the interpretation of Onkelos, right? Even remember, I told you Onkelos' translation in which he left all this out because that wasn't his job. His job was to translate. It was my job, me as the Rambam, or talking as Rambam, my job to expound these wonderful philosophical and beautiful ideas, right? But even the way you look at that is when he says under the throne of his glory, I mean to say the first matter is also in true reality under the heaven that is called the throne. And I got this idea from it's really a medrash from Rabbi Elazar ben Horkenes, which he's going to refer to later. We'll get to it later. I think we mentioned it in a previous lecture, but I don't remember. You'll see it in one of the chapters later, which is 26. I'm pretty sure we in part 2, but we will get there. So the purpose of everyone endowed with intellect should be wholly directed to rejecting corporality. This has to be. If you have the remotest bit of brain, Rambam is saying, make sure you just realize that these are intellectual ideas. These are ideas that they're apprehending and perceiving. These are not actual beings that they're seeing as God. Okay, understand this and reflect on it. I want to bounce off into the land of Rambam and creation, even though I gave away most of what I was going to say. But before I do that, I want to know if there's any comments so far. Remember, Rambam, just a quick review, he translated 2 verses for us because of his understanding of the word regel, the word foot, how the word foot ends up meaning one person being one being being the cause of something. And that's how he explained the verse of God standing upon the Mount of Olives. And then the other verse, which was the verse of the image of God standing on the whiteness of sapphire stone. I know I have some Christians that are listening on this lecture, and I very, very much welcome them. But I'm going to say something. There's no question in my mind that when Rambam chose this verse of God standing upon the Mount of Olives, he directly meant it as an attack on the Christian idea of Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives when he was coming to Jerusalem during his last days. So there's no question that Rambam had that in mind, because he does this on many occasions where he attacks ideas from other religions, both Christianity and Islam, and he wants to tell you how a Jew is supposed to interpret this verse. But I'm going to put that out there, and now I'll take questions from the crowd.
Well,
go ahead.
I just want to address the second story about the sapphire, the clearness of the sapphire in the throne, because Rambam's interpretation, or Pine's reading of whatever of Rambam, is so different from what I've studied is part of a Musar text that's attributed to Rabbi Simcha Zissel.
Okay.
That this was not, this depicted God's feeling, or the burden of the pain of the Israelites in Egypt. So there was just a completely different kind of transmission going on in a different direction. It was coming, God was appreciating what the Israelites were experiencing.
Yes, that's let me quote you from Rambam in the Pines. He says, the explanation of the meaning of parables is a supposititious matter, for their intention may be this or that. Rambam was saying, Onkelos just translated, but he didn't go on expounding farther, because you can explain it like this or like that. There's a lot of ways to understand it, and they're all valid. They all have their place. And then the Rambam goes on to give his path. But what you just said was another nice way of understanding it. And there's many nice ways, and they're all valid, right? Assuming they're all, the purpose of them all is to approach the truth, you know. But yeah, and that's how Rambam himself admitted that there's all kinds of ways you can understand this. I'll give you mine, and you can take it or leave it, you know. But that's his way. Any other comments that anyone else wants to tell? If there aren't, and feel free, if you want to cut in at any point, please just say so, raise your hand, or just talk, and I'll relinquish the microphone. But so right now I'm going to turn to, in Pine's volume 2, page 281. That's part 2, chapter 13, where Rambam starts a series of chapters on creation. And here he goes into more depth. It's a little long. I'll try to read through it, but I'll paraphrase it as I go through it, so that, and he lays out 3 views of creation: the Mosaic or the Judaic view of creation, the Platonic, from Plato, view of creation, and the Aristotelian view of creation. He lays out the 3. He brushes aside a couple other possibilities of those that don't believe in a God. See, he puts those 3 because Plato and Aristotle both believed in some form of God, right? Not necessarily the same, what the Rambam's concept of God was, but they had some kind of God playing a role. Whereas then he talks another possibility, which he kind of brushes aside, of Epicurus and a few other thinkers from the old days, from the Greek days, that didn't have a God playing a role in anything. So but so here he lays these out. Now this is interesting for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that really makes it interesting to me is that obviously the science today and what you study in college about how the world came to be, how the universe came to be, is very different than Plato's world and Aristotle's world and Maimonides' world, and so it's very different. But what's interesting to me is that after Maimonides explains what the Judaic view of God is, and then he explains Plato, and then he explains Aristotle, what he does for himself for a view is basically he takes what he knew of as the scientific view. I use the word science very loosely because it's a very different meaning then than it has now, and basically just puts God in front of it. And then it makes the whole process have so much more meaning. And in many ways, this is really very, very relevant to us. Like we might look at this and think, well, how is this relevant to me today? Now I'm reading about Higgs boson particles and hadron colliders and particle physics and quantum mechanics. And, I'm in a whole different world than Plato, but actually it does mean a lot, because all of those laws of nature, however you translate them and however you study them and however closer we get to the truth, to reality, all Maimonides really does is put God in front of it as the cause, and that changes the meaning of everything. Now, so I said that, but I want to go through that chapter. It's a little long, but I'm going to try to go through it. So there are three opinions of human beings. Now, what Rambam means here is there are three opinions that people have, right? Namely, of all those who believe there is an existent deity. There are three basic categories of those who believe in some form of God, right? With regard to the eternity of the world or its production in time, how the world was created, and whether or not the world is eternal. The first opinion, which is the opinion of all who believe in the law of Moses, our master, peace be upon him, meaning anyone who believes in the Torah, is that the world as a whole, I mean to say, every existent other than God, may he be exalted, was brought into existence by God after having been purely and absolutely non-existent, right? In other words, there was absolutely nothing. Yeah, no, we can't imagine it. We can try, but the bottom line is that there was nothing, right? And then God may be exalted, who, however he existed, we don't understand God, so we don't know what it means that he existed, but he did, alone, nothing else. There was no angels, no spheres, nothing. Afterwards, through his will and his volition, by deciding to do so, he brought into existence out of nothing all the beings as they are, everything that we know. Time itself being one of the created things. So the whole concept of time itself, and then Rambam is going to go on a little speech here about time. Time is consequent of our motion. Time is only something. Time is relative to something that's moving. It only has meaning when something is moving. Motion is a mikra. Motion is an accident. When he says accident, he means a quality, a thing that something happens to have, right? Why is it that wood is hard or metal is malleable? These are just qualities that happen to exist in certain types of matter. So movement is the same thing, and then time just measures movement. So time is dependent upon something that is dependent upon something. Furthermore, what is moved, that is upon the motion of which time is consequent, is itself created in time, and came to be after not having been. So accordingly, when someone says God was, that God existed before, and we're thinking in terms of time, like, there's a time on a clock, and before 10 o'clock, that's when God was only here, right? You're already off base, right? Because there was no clock, there was no time o'clock, there was no such thing. So, and similarly, all the thoughts that are carried along in the mind regarding the infinite duration of his existence before the creation of the world are all due to a supposition regarding time, or to imagining time, but not due to the true reality of time. For time is indubitably an accident. In other words, time is something that is a way we describe things that are created, that we see. According to us, is one of the created things. It's one of the created qualities. Just like you'd say something's black, something's dark, you could also say that the motion going on is taking a long time or taking a short time. It's fast, it's slow. And though it doesn't belong, okay, so I think you get the idea. But we shall expand upon here. I'm going skipping to the last paragraph on that page. A notion that though it does not belong to the purpose that we pursue, it is useful with regard to it. This notion is as follows. What caused the nature of time to be hidden from the majority of the men of knowledge, so that the notion perplexed them, like Galen and others? He's taking a jab at Galen and saying that Galen couldn't conceive of a time without time, and made them wonder whether or not time had a true reality, is the fact that time itself is something subsisting. I explained this before, that time is dependent on something that's dependent on something. For the accidents that have a primary existence, I'm going to skip a little because I don't want to go into this too much. Not that it's not important. You can feel free to read it on your own, but let me go kind of on 282, the first word of about somewhere around the 15th line. It says, hence God's bringing the world into existence does not have a temporal beginning. That's the bottom line. For time is one of the created things. Consider this thoroughly. So, and then I'm going to skip a little. This is one of the opinions, and it is undoubtedly, this is the second chapter on 282, a basis of the law of Moshe, a basis of the Torah, And it is second to the basis and the belief of the unity of God, right? The bottom line is that only God could do such a thing, and that's the way it is. Now, nothing other than this should come to your mind. It was Abraham, our father, who began to proclaim in public this opinion to which speculation had led him. He came to this conclusion. For this reason, he made his proclamation in the name of the Lord, God of the world, and so on. So that's opinion number one. God created the world. Next, the second opinion is that of the philosophers of whom we have heard reports and whose discourses we have seen. And like I told you, he'll quote him in a minute, but he's referring to Plato here. They said it is absurd that God could bring a thing into existence out of nothing. In other words, they looked at the laws of nature and they saw that everything that we create, everything that happens is created from something else that existed before it, right? So it is also anything that gets destroyed doesn't really get destroyed. It just becomes something else. It changes form. It is likewise not possible that things should pass away into nothing. So I mean to say that it is not possible that a certain being endowed with matter and form should be generated out of the absolute non-existence of that matter. If it didn't exist at all, it can't all of a sudden exist. To predicate of God that he's able to do this, according to them, is like saying that he can do something that's impossible. So one of his examples is that God can make it that you have a square that the diagonal is equal in length to the side. God can't do that, according to Plato, because it's impossible, right? So just like God can't make a square, a triangle whose diagonal is equal to the sides, equilateral triangle, that is, so what may be understood from the discourse that they say that just as his not bringing impossible things into existence does not argue a lack of, in other words, it's not because God is weak, it's just because it's impossible. So, and since what's impossible is firmly established in nature, God also can't bring into existence something out of nothing, because that also goes against basic laws. So therefore, they believe there exists a certain matter that is eternal. Some kind of matter, the first matter that we referred to back in the chapter we just studied, right? That is eternal. That matter always existed and always will exist. God decided to take that first matter and make a world out of it. This is how Plato was thinking. They do not believe that it has the same rank in what exists as he, but that he may be the cause of the existence, and it has the same relation towards him as a clay has towards a potter or something like that. And therefore he can use, so in other words, he's the more powerful. However, you see the problem with this is that it takes a dent out of monotheism, not just because it makes something that's impossible, makes something impossible for God to do. But if there's a matter that always existed, then just like God always existed, and remember, I'm not talking in time, but you understand that we can't really comprehend that. But there was something else. There was a first matter that has an independent existence of its own, which automatically means that there isn't just one God. There's something else, right? Which is anathema, which doesn't work according to Rambam, according to basic Judaism. That can't be. There can't be something else. So that's why Rambam can't accept that this first matter was what God used in order to create the world out of it, right? And so on and so forth. I'm going to skip to the last paragraph on that page, 283. The people belonging to this sect are divided in several sects, but I'm not going to bother giving you all the names of the different schools of classical thought. However, the universal principle is identical with what I have told you, and this is the belief. This is what Plato said, right? And Aristotle argues on Plato. I'm going to skip a little again. On page 284, he brings a third opinion, is that of Aristotle. And I want to say a little bit about what Aristotle says. I'm going to, Rambam's summary. So Aristotle says like this: he can't even understand that, well, there's this, he also agrees with Plato, right? Well, he asserts what also is asserted by the people that we just mentioned, right? That something can't just come out of existence out of nothing. So all of those impossibility arguments, he proposes the same arguments, but he goes beyond this and says that heaven also is not subject to coming into existence and leaving. So his point could be summed up as follows. He thinks that everything that we see around us will never stop and has never not been. In other words, the entire world, the entire creation as we've seen it, is eternal. It's always been this way. Trees have always grown, trees have always died, trees have always rotted into dirt, and then new trees have always grown. That's just the way it's always been, and that's the way it's always going to be, and it's never going to change. according to Aristotle. And time has always been and will always be. And everything will come and go and so on. I'm paraphrasing, but I want to cover the basic point here. I mean to say, I skipped kind of to the middle, that its first matter is not subject to, in its essence, to generation and passing away, but the various forms succeed each other in it in such a way that it divests itself of one form and assumes another. In other words, this first matter is the matter that we see around us. It's the entire world that's constantly growing and dying and coming to life and shrinking and growing and so on and so forth. He thinks furthermore that this whole higher and lower order cannot be corrupted and abolished. No innovation can take place in it that isn't according to its nature. It's constantly going according to the rules of nature. No occurrence deviates and so on. I'm going to skip a little, but then in his opinion, it would be an impossibility that will should change in God. God can't change his mind. God can't decide to do things, so to speak, based on our behavior or so on. That doesn't make sense. However, all of that exists, what has been brought into existence by God through his volition, because it was not that he created it at any point, but God is kind of the driving power behind it all. The God is kind of the gasoline that makes it all run. Okay. Just it is impossible that the deity should become non-existent, just like God can't become non-existent and God can't change. It's also impossible that he should change his mind and decide to stop making the world go around and so on. This is the summary and the truth of these opinions. They are opinions of those according to whom the existence of the deity for this world has been demonstrated. These are the three opinions of those who believe that there is such a thing as a God in some form. Those who have no knowledge of the existence of the deity, and then he goes on to describe them. And then if you can finish reading the whole paragraph, but then he says, I'm going to go skip towards the end of the longer paragraph on 285, for the purpose of every follower of the law of Moses and Abraham our father, or of those who go the way of these two, is to believe there is nothing eternal in any way at all existing simultaneously with God. We can't buy Plato's and Aristotle's opinion because there can't have been anything that existed that has that quality of foreverness other than God himself. To believe also that the bringing into existence of a being out of non-existence is for the deity not an impossibility, but rather an obligation. For us who believe in the Torah, believing that God could bring out of that he can break that ultimate impossible law, make something exist which had no existence before, that's is for us an obligation, as is deemed likewise by some of the men of speculation. There are even those philosophers who have thought of a similar idea of ex nihilo, of meaning something from nothing. So now, if this is a little bit larger exposition of that which we learned in today's chapter, where he talked about regel. So this was that idea that was comprehended by Moshe when he saw God, so to speak, when he saw a vision of God with at his feet, whereas a ma'aseh livnata sapphire was a work of clarity, of transparency, of sapphire stone. And so Rambam took that verse and made it into a much bigger philosophical idea, that verse is Moses grasping the concept that there was a first matter, and from that first matter, God created a world, but the first matter itself was caused by God himself, as opposed to what the philosophers say, that the first matter existed alongside God all along. So that is, Rambam goes on for a long way after this, and we will get there, because I do plan on just simply plotting through the entire book, but I do keep jumping ahead so that we get these concepts and ideas without waiting for Rambam to get there. So I'd be interested to know if anyone has thoughts about how this might help them think through, based on what our contemporary ideas of creation, or any comments anyone wants to make. I'm going to open the floor.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm actually kind of struck by like the leading science in here. It's almost like I'm like, did Einstein read Maimonides?
I don't know.
Because I mean, the whole interspersing of time and matter, it's just kind of like a little before his time, you know?
Yeah, I think so. But maybe we just aren't aware of how much people knew back then. But also a lot of these a lot of people don't understand that the scientific revolution, occurred on the back of all of this, of all of the philosophers, all of the Greek and Roman philosophers that built the background, and all of the religious thinkers like Maimonides and others, who developed the background upon which science can develop. When people say science versus religion, they don't understand that science only came to be because of religion. I'm sure that Einstein was aware of Maimonides. How much he read him and how much familiar he was, I don't know. But it's impossible to imagine that he wasn't aware of him and read of him at some point. I just can't tell you. Maybe someone wrote an article about that. I don't know, but let me know if you find one.
Okay.
I was going to bring up a concept discussed in a book written by a friend of mine at Harvard Smithsonian Astrophysics Center. The book is called Let There Be Light, and his name is Howard Smith. And he compares the Bereshit and the creation of the physical world 13.7 billion years ago through the Big Bang, out of this incredibly dense and minute particle that exploded to create the world, and compares that with the word Bereshit, from Reshit being a tiny, tiny speck.
Now, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we did have in an earlier lecture I brought, and Rambam, when he referred to the Medrash of Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, that, and he said he's going to talk about it later. In a previous lecture, I actually read through that. It's 26 in part 2, chapter 26 of part 2, where Rambam says that God created something from which everything, the rest of everything else kind of, so there was one on the first day, God created one solid bit of matter from which everything came out of that matter, which sounds very Big Bang like.
Yeah, could you tell me what the reference to is in Rambam?
It was, I'm pretty sure it was chapter 26. Let me look again. That is where he referred to Elazar ben Hyrcanus. I have to go back and find the exact chapter, because we did it back in the beginning, probably around like my 4th or 5th lecture, where he says that explicitly. I'll find it, Belinetta, and I'll have to shoot it to you offline. Okay.
Okay, great.
Was there something else? I cut you off. I apologize.
No, that was the point, and
okay.
I think there's at least some people today try to elide science and the kind of Kabbalistic theories about God's creation of the world. Yes,
and I'm not like a super fan of saying of people make attempts to say when there's a scientific discovery, and then they say, oh, this is so perfect because this is exactly what this verse was saying. I mean, it's okay to say that kind of stuff, it's fine, but I'm wary of it because our learning evolves and changes. Science evolves over time. We learn more and more and more information, and to say, so what I get from Rambam here is not so much, because Rambam was talking about Plato and Aristotle. So he was taking what he knew to be the cutting edge knowledge of the time, right? And basically he propounded a theory which is basically Plato, right? And by the way, there are scholars that argue that Rambam really believed Plato's philosophy, but he was hiding it and he didn't want to say. I think it's a big pile of mumbo jumbo. I think it's baloney, because Rambam says very clearly what he believes. But there's a lot of people that try to argue that. But what Rambam really did was he's going with Plato's idea, but he's saying that the whole point is that God didn't create God didn't take first matter and create the world. God created first matter, and then from it created the world, which is a tremendous difference, right? So he's saying science is fine. It's totally cool to say that the world came out of, I'm looking at it from Rambam science, right? His day, Plato science, right? That God took the first matter and made the world. Okay, that's cool, right? That's fine, as long as you understand that God made the first matter and it wasn't there the whole time, right? And so it's a similar thing. Like, what would Rambam have said today? Probably, although, who can ever say such a thing, something along the lines of, was there a big bang? Sure, but who made the bang happen? God, right? Was there an incredibly dense tiny particle? Yeah, who made the incredibly dense tiny particle, right? So he's not negating the scientific advances. If they discover something else tomorrow, right, that, when they discovered the Higgs boson or whatever, they discover some other thing, right, that's cool too. And it doesn't, it in no way contradicts the existence of a creator. And that's really what I gather from Rambam here. And by the way, Rambam also takes Aristotle, the idea that God is the mover, making everything always go around the whole time, right, is an Aristotelian idea. That energy that animates the world, and we even have in modern science, it wasn't just a big bang, but there's forces which make everything move, right?
Sure.
So the ultimate force that makes everything move forward or backward or whatever direction it's going is God, and that's an Aristotelian idea. So the Rambam kind of fuses Plato and Aristotle, but just puts God in front of it all.
So the motion of an expanding world was something that Einstein's theory seems to predict or forecast or something close to that. And so the question about Einstein and Rambam, and so maybe he had some inklings about what Rambam had to say.
Maybe. Any other comments? If there are, if anybody wants to, you can shoot me something offline or email or whatever. And
I was just going to say,
oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Yes.
I don't want to extend this too long. I was just going to say, I was struck by how dismissive he was of the fourth approach, the Epicurean approach, which is, I would say, perhaps the more prevalent viewpoint today, at least amongst the non-religious world, right? That the world is created by chance and everything just
happens to be the
random.
way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
But he kind of says, we know that's not true. Let's move on.
It's partly, I think, reflective of the fact that in those days, everyone in the intellectual circles were mostly either Plato followers or Aristotle followers, or Muhammad or Jesus or Moses, or however you want to look at it, right? But they all believed in God, right? And so the people that believed it was all chance weren't really an enemy of his. I think today he probably would have spent more time, and by the way, he also has just spent time devoted to proving that there is a God, right? So in the chapters prior, he already spent time saying that, so that kind of addresses that a little too. But yeah, he was pretty dismissive of that view. Anyone else? Well, I thank you all for joining again. It was fun as usual, and hope to be here next week. Have a wonderful evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.